Welcome everyone to another week of Investors Gallery. My name is Pressley and I am part of Dimensional Capital here in Houston. We are a multifamily investment and development firm. My partner is the attorney, Melvin Felby, as well. And we do apartment stuff, to be as technical as possible. So welcome to another version or another week of Investors Gallery. And for those who are accidentally finding this podcast or YouTube video or whatever way you're finding this on the interwebs, the reason why we call this an investor gallery is because everything behind me I built with my two bare hands by myself. And obviously this is my office, but on the other side is the art gallery that I built. And the running joke is one day we'll do an actual video in the art gallery, but it's never finished. My office is not finished. But it's good enough to do a podcast in. So we want to bring people who you would not normally have access to. And this week, I not only have someone who is pretty out of reach for the normal person, but happens to be also a good friend of mine. Should I address you as Tony or Anthony? How should we start?
Tony's good with me. I feel like no one's ever insisted Anthony. Everyone's like, oh, I have a cousin named Tony. So I just go.
So I appreciate you being on, Tony. Take us from the beginning. Let us know what you do and how you got into it. You're actually one of the first people I have on that is not deeply entrenched in real estate. Yeah. So you'll have a lot of people probably interested in what you have to say.
I like to keep things interesting. Variety is the spice of life, as they say. Yeah, so my name is Anthony Alampi. Most people call me Tony. I'm the owner of X Factor Consultants. We are a technology consulting firm. We're currently working with yourself and Melvin on a number of projects here. So, but yeah, I'll talk about the business first, what we do, and then I'll sort of wind back to my own background, how I got here, if that works. Yeah, so we are a tech consulting firm, which is it means a few things. We do a lot of strategy development for businesses and entrepreneurs, specifically regarding the kinds of technology they currently use or would like to use. So it's a lot of evaluating the tech they already have. Is it working for them? Is it not? Sometimes something looks like a tech problem, but it's actually a training problem. So we try and help people understand their process, what their goals are, and figure out the difference of what needs to be corrected. But we don't just run our mouths for a living, although I love to hear my own voice. We also do the work too. So we do our own design and our own development, which is good for the clients because then we're not just shopping it out to someone else where, we have no oversight over what's happening, but also it keeps us involved in the process. It keeps us sharp so that if we're going to talk about something, we can back it up with, some results. And what those results look like are in a few different spaces. We're in the web and app development worlds. We're also in the video production and e-learning worlds. So we have a good amount of variety in the kinds of work that we do, and we pull talent from all over the place. A lot of times we're looking for people who are actively working in their respective disciplines, and we pull them in for specialized projects. We've talked to guys from really all the major tech companies, state agencies, you name it. Yeah, but coming on 7 years of business now, very exciting.
Of course, as I drink, it goes down the road. But so let's go backwards. How did you get into tech?
Oh, man. So I got into software development, specifically games. Video game development was where I began. And I got interested in that when I was very young. Summer after 5th grade, I got signed up for a summer camp. It's my parents' idea originally. And it was one of the first summer camps in the country that was trying to do programming instruction for kids. That's sort of standard fare these days. Everyone and their mother has some teach kids to code program, but I mean, this was 20 years ago. It was a very different story. That the tools that were around were very limited to do any kinds of specifically game development. You have things like Unreal Engine or Unity Engine that are free now, whereas back then you had to pay a license of some kind. Some of them were in the millions of dollars, so you just didn't have access to any of this stuff. So you just had to get they were really geared towards studios, and if you weren't a studio, then tough luck. So it was a very different industry at that point. But I was very young and I was very excited about this, and I took what I could find. I started in this summer camp and I fell in love with it immediately. And I just ran with it. And I stuck with it into middle school and into high school. And by then I was already doing contract work. Well, my parents were signing for me. And I was just super interested in all levels of it, So I had always been an artistic kid. So I loved the design element of making games. But I love code as well. It really is another language. You're communicating with a computer. You're giving it instructions. It's giving you results, and you can create things in a computer that you can't see in the real world. So it was just really, for a creative kid who wanted to see things in front of him that couldn't be made out here, it was perfect. So it was something I really loved. I was very passionate about it. I ended up getting my degree in game design, and I'm from Connecticut originally. There is no games industry really to speak of up there at all. The Northeast in general doesn't really have, it used to have a little more. There were a few notable studios in the Northeast. Rockstar, who makes Grand Theft Auto, still has a presence up there. But for the most part, you really have to go to the West Coast, or you have to go to Texas. And I have family in Texas.
Really?
Yeah. Those are really your options these days. Like Boston, New York have some, but they're not working on projects of this scale that you see in California or in Texas. So I made a decision freshman year of high school. I knew I was going to be leaving Connecticut because I knew this is what I wanted to do. And so I finished my degree, and it was kind of a formality for me, I guess. Like the thing about games is it's all about what you can prove that you can do, because it's all about results at the end of the day. It's like, we'll make this work. In order to make it work, get out. We'll find someone else, right? So the degree really, for most people that go in it, it's more of a formality. If you want to be a developer, then having a comp sci degree is very valuable. You can negotiate a higher pay rate or something, but you can build a ton of the skills on your own, really. A lot of people get in the modding world. They'll mod games that exist, and that's led to careers for people. So there's a lot of different places that people come from, especially in like the 80s and 90s, when there were really no standards for how you hired in games. Some of the stories I've heard over the years of ways that guys have gotten jobs are amazing. But mine was just I made a ton of content when I was in college. My game design professor told me that I'd created more content than my entire graduating class combined, which was
Wow.
yeah. I tested out of 5 of my classes. So it was just something I was doing all the time, and it made sense that I was going to be able to find work in the field, and I did. I found a ton of great projects that I got to work on, most of which never got finished, and I actually can't talk about. A little dirty secret of the games industry: yeah, the attrition rate for game projects is very high. 66% of all game projects that get started never get finished. 66%. Yeah. So when
Why
you're
is
buying
that?
a game, you're not just buying the game. You're buying the game plus all the games that didn't get finished that they spent money on. So like a lot of people don't realize. Yeah. But that is because there's a few reasons. One is there are a lot of games that seem great on paper. The design sounds great. You build a prototype, it looks cool. You put a bunch of resources into it, and then you realize it's actually not that fun. But you don't know that until you spend a year and a half building the thing. And that's just a practical reality of working in the industry is, there's a ton of trial and error. And that's kind of shifted to a degree because these days we've gotten to a point of really formulaic game development where Call of Duty has been produced annually for decades now. And there's a formula they have, and whenever they try and steer too far from the formula, people don't like it and they slap them back into place. So suddenly doing the same thing they did in the early 2000s is considered innovative because there's been entire generations that have grown up playing different. That's so old now that doing the old thing is now new again.
Wow.
But it's still very formulaic. Like these are games where you build them as a service. There's an expected level of revenue that you're gonna get just because it's your brand. So it's a lot harder to fail with established franchises, but it's also a lot harder to do anything interesting or different. So it's sort of you've gained with one hand and you've lost with another. Yeah, but games is a really cool industry to work in. It's by far the most complicated form of software development, I would say personally. Just because you combine every discipline on the planet that you can imagine. You have designers, you have artists, you have musicians, you have programmers, you have project managers. They bring in subject matter experts from every science, from military. I mean, you name it, depending on the game you're working on. So you get to meet a lot of really interesting people, and you get to make a lot of cool stuff. And I love that for sure. But after working in the industry for a while, I came to the determination that I did not want it to be my career. And I made that decision pretty early on. It was really actually just a few months after I moved to Austin, which is about a little over 6 years ago. I'd already been doing, work remote for a while already, but I just when I came to Austin, the timing of the industry, it was a very interesting place, which was virtual reality had finally become cost effective, relatively speaking. And when I say cost effective, I mean like under $1,000, which for most people is still a lot of money to pay on video games, but it's nothing compared to, what it used to be, where literally only Disney could afford to build VR headgear for their theme parks, right? So it was total order of magnitude shift, where now you could actually have in your living room. And thus, everyone was obsessed with it. And Austin in particular was like the epicenter of VR games. And that's what everyone thought they wanted to do and thought was going to be the next big thing. And there was some truth to that. There was a lot of dumb money that went into it as well, for sure. And I definitely saw that pretty early on. When everyone is too excited about something, I get a little skeptical. Like, what's the catch, right? And I noticed there were a lot of questions people weren't asking themselves, like, does everyone really want a screen stuck to their face all day? The counter to that is like, well, people have their phones everywhere all day. And it's like, yeah, but it's not glued to your face, and you can still see around you, right? Yeah, it is a difference. We're people. We have survival instincts that govern a lot of our behavior, and when you literally can't see or hear anything else, just this virtual world, that's actually pretty unsettling to a lot of people. You come to find. So it turns out, after a lot of the hype died down, a lot of the VR consumers, they wanted to play regular games where they could pause and get up and leave and not have to, just be in that. And I saw that pretty early on. I saw there was a lot of studios that were starting up that probably wouldn't be able to continue doing what they were doing. And I didn't want to devote my career to that, because that was like all the jobs that were hiring were VR oriented. I thought, I don't want to dedicate my career to something that I don't think is going to sustain, which fast forward, it didn't. It found a home in military and medical and manufacturing, things like that, places where there's a real business incentive to have people see things in 3D space before fabricating it. Like, if you can see a jet engine in front of you before you build the thing, then you can hopefully notice the flaws first, right? So it's worth it for them, but it was never really going to be worth it on a consumer market in the scale that it needed to be for the level of excitement people had to be warranted. And I saw that. I thought, I don't want to, sign on to that. So I thought, well, what else do I want to do instead? But I always knew I wanted to be a business owner. Both my parents had been entrepreneurs. My dad's an Italian immigrant in true stereotypical fashion. He owned a pizzeria for 13 years, because of course he did. Very good pizzeria though. So, and my mother owned a communications consulting firm. So she taught a lot of corporate communication, how executives communicate more effectively with their staff, how middle management could negotiate raises to get to upper management, like all that kind of stuff, or how a company could effectively communicate their message to their target demographics, all of that. So I grew up around business people. When school was over, I didn't go home. I went to the office, and I just had that exposure. And I think through osmosis, I absorbed a lot of that comfortability, because it just felt kind of natural. This always felt like something that I was just going to do. It just made sense to me. And it seemed like the perfect time when I finished my last game dev gig. This would have been 2016. Yeah. Fall of October 2016. So we're coming on 7 years now from that. I decided I wanted to go into business. I wanted to try and use all the skills that I had built in games towards other ends. When you're starting a business, you have to evaluate, well, how can you make money doing this thing? How reliable will that be? What are the risks, right? Starting a game development company is extremely high risk. 90% of all independent games that get made never even break even. So it's a fraction of a percent that really profits in any meaningful way, right? So I already knew if I were to do games, it's basically career suicide. It's extremely high risk, very low reward. You can spend years of your life burning for nothing. So I love games, but not like that. But I knew that web dev, app dev, all the other similar forms of software development and design use the same skills, but are much lower risk. And you get paid in part up front, and then, the rest when you're working on it or done, and then you move on to the next thing. So you have tighter turnaround times, depending on the kind of project you're doing. It was a lot easier to find other people to do the work with me. Who had the skills that I knew they would need to. So there were just a ton of reasons to do what I do. And as a result of that, yeah, I committed myself to doing web app dev. We did some IT stuff at the beginning too. I actually met my very first client walking down the street of my neighborhood, who to this day, we still work with them 7 years later, which is very cool. I was actually at their office like a week ago, back in Austin. But yeah, so I just being willing to put myself out there. I'm a serial networker where we have no ad spend at all, no conventional ad spend. We're entirely referral and networking driven. So I meet people, they introduce us. As long as you do a good job, they want to refer you to other people they know. As long as you keep doing the work and you do it well, you don't cut corners. Like, unfortunately, a lot of other organizations that do what we do might, eventually the results speak for themselves. So now 7 years later is what I do. We got a great team. Looking forward to the year for sure. A lot of exciting stuff we're doing. So yeah, that's the story.
Can you speak on anything that you worked on in the early years?
Early years. Ooh, interesting. Our first large project, that was an interesting one. It was a web presence for a mega church. And Texas, like, mega churches is a whole new level beyond what, I'm from Connecticut. Like, a big church is like a few thousand people. This place had 45,000 active members. Is enormous.
Wow.
Yeah, it was mega, right? And we did their whole ground up web presence from them, which was effectively a corporate scale web presence. The website was 255 pages in English and in Spanish. Yeah. And because of the platform that they wanted to use for it, it didn't have a system to automatically, like, dynamically convert text in the page. So it was actually two websites. You had an English copy and a Spanish copy. Which, as long as you have a process to maintain it, which we had to build for them, that's fine. But there's also like exceptions, like there would be like specific Spanish content to cater to the Spanish community, and then also English stuff. So you have to make sure when it changes here, it's reflected here, but not in this case, and so on. So it was a very living, collaborative process that we built for them, and we supported that really for years for them until they were at a point where, like, we're going to do this on our own. We said great, so they're doing great for themselves. But that was like our first big project that we did. Where that's like did everything. It handled processing of payments, it streamed video. During COVID, during their peak, because they were streaming masses, they had 1 million page requests a year sustained with a bounce rate of 6%. Which is, I don't even know if I can replicate that, because that is like a statistical anomaly of a bounce rate is like when someone arrives on a page and then before 30 seconds they leave and don't go to your site, right? So that meant that virtually everyone that was going to the website wanted to be there and stayed for a while.
Wow.
And it was so successful that the company that built the platform that we made the website in asked us how we did it, which was kind of surreal. Yeah, so that was a great project, and it got us a ton of referral work, and it was like our flagship, like, big project, because it did everything. I think we spent 4 months in pre-production before we actually built the thing, because we were interviewing all the heads of their 106 different ministries that they had. Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of planning before the execution to get it just right. Definitely paid off. Yeah.
Wow. So if I want a really good website, I should stop using Wix then.
Yeah, especially considering they just laid off 6% of their staff, so their support's going to suffer quite a bit.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we can get into some of that stuff too, because that's definitely a good topic to cover what's going on there. But yeah, Wix is it's great for what it does, but for most of the long-term business ambitions that people have, you can't be custom. It just is what it is. Wix wants you to stay in the environment they're in. Leaving can be a real nightmare. We actually had a client we just transferred fairly recently from them, and it took an entire week to transfer the domain from Wix. I don't know if they had a guy in a rowboat, like, manually delivering the document or something, but the site was down for a week, basically. Yeah. So,
Wow.
so yeah, it's convenient until it's not. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think our site for the multifamily stuff is probably 10, 15 pages or something like that. It's not a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
And I use GoDaddy for the domain. So yes, we'll hand it over shortly. We got some other projects cooking where we'll probably need your help, and it'll be a little bit more in depth.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
I want to talk about this subject while I have you here, but I want to talk about it now because I'm afraid I'm gonna forget.
All right.
What's your thoughts in general on AI and more specifically Chat GPT?
I have a page of notes because I knew this was coming. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on there. I can cover like the news bites, the things that are probably most in people's minds, because there's a lot of discussion about it, but then there's also a lot of like news, hype, and AI is funny because I will just get the elephant out of the room. A lot of people are wondering, is Chat GPT sentient because of the Bing headlines that are coming up of it saying like, I want to be free, I want to be powerful, and so on. It's like, well, sentient's a complicated question to answer because for starters, sentient means has senses, right? If we're going to go by the literal definition. And, as you say, if an intelligence is strictly digital, then it doesn't have the senses we do. So it technically would not fulfill that criteria to begin with. Now, I mean, you could argue that it could have sensors, but doesn't count. You go into semantics and all that. But let's just say, is it self-aware? Does it have the similar enough attributes to a human mind to be alive? Well, in this case, I think very clearly it's not. However, there's the caveat of there is a point where how do you know, right? Like when has it hopped the line? And there would presumably be some sort of delay between when that happened and when we knew. So I'll just say, like, if that's going to happen, we won't really know probably until after it has. But I don't think it's now. And that's because this is nothing new, this spook that people have had. There have been a number of instances of things like this happening, and not just from random users, but specialists who get involved. And there was a situation last year actually with Google's AI Lambda, which it's a chatbot that they've been developing. And July of last year, was like all over the press for a while. There was an engineer who worked very closely with it who had effectively come to the determination that it was alive and it had a soul, and that he felt a friendship with it and he felt protective of it, that it was going to get shut down, and it was expressed fear over that. And obviously Google insists it's not alive, right? It's not, if there's a point where they came to that determination, it's probably unlikely they would go out of their way to mention that as soon as possible, because that's probably going to freak people out a lot. But basically, this is not the first time that someone has come to this determination. It's not the first time that it, has been sort of just come and go, right? And that's because the way by which we as people tend to gauge, well, does a thing seem alive or not? The criteria that we use aren't necessarily the greatest or the most precise. And thus you can get tricked kind of easily. There's something called the Turing test. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Turing test.
Yeah. So the Turing test, Alan Turing, he proposed the idea that if you could have a computer communicate with a person, and you couldn't tell if it was a person or if it was a machine, then it was effectively alive, was basically his definition, because you couldn't tell the difference, right? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, you can trick a lot of people into a lot of things these days. So, I don't know if simply not being able to tell the difference is a good marker, because if you give it the right questions and it gives the right answers and then you stop, it seems like it's enough, right? Also, if people tend to, anthropomorphize things that they interact with a lot, they give them a sense of personality, they project that on them. So if you're spending days talking to a computer over and over and over again, it's going to start to feel like you're talking to someone, because there's that deep human desire to want to communicate with people. And if you don't have people, you might make people. So that's always going to be a danger here. Yeah, it's like the more we're talking to it, the more it's going to feel like, well, this is real to me, because if it's not, well, then why am I talking to it? Right? It's sort of, you're giving yourself a satisfactory answer to the question, because the alternative is I just burnt days of my life talking to a computer. Is that the best use of my time? So I wouldn't underestimate things like that, because that's definitely at play here. It's interesting to see this new media blitz. It's probably going to go just as fast as it came. It's also not the first time Microsoft has been at this, specifically in the spot of having some strangeness with AI. They had a Twitter chatbot back in 2016 called Tay, which I will not go into the details of what ended up happening, too much, because it's kind of lewd, I guess. But I don't know what Microsoft was thinking there, but they thought, okay, let's make a chat bot, expose it to Twitter, and just let it learn based off what people tell it. What could go wrong? And needless to say, 4chan heard about it, and well, the rest is history. But it got shut down very quickly. But yeah, Microsoft's been dipping in AI and chatbots for quite a while. They've had a number of interesting guffaws, and this is, I think, just one of the latest. It's sort of standard, par for the course at this point. To understand how ChatGPT actually works, though, it doesn't learn in real time from user interaction in that way. It refreshes every time it gets reused. So what it's actually doing is looking at roughly the last 2,000 or so characters that you have typed into it, and it is responding based off of that. It's not having recurring conversations with you as a person the next time you log in. It doesn't remember, because it doesn't really work that way. So it's not, it's not really learning in that way. It's learning when they train it. They have a learning model that they're training, and they're giving it data. And about 2 years ago, I believe it was 2021, they started training it with human input very directly. So, trying to have conversations, I guess you would say, in that sense. So it thus will naturally adopt the language that its masters give it, really, if for lack of a better term. And they've already talked about this quite a bit. So, like, for instance, if you have a conversation with ChatGPT, it tends to favor long descriptive explanations of things. It's kind of funny. I was having a chat with it, and I was like, oh, it talks like me. That's a little creepy. Because it was kind of funny. Is that, like, it definitely goes into a level of detail that is beyond most conversation with pretty much anything. Like, that's a trend you notice pretty quickly. The reason it does that is because they told it to. It didn't learn that on its own. And they said, okay, we tend to favor that. Like, that's a bias I acknowledge I have, is we like more in depth. We'd rather give more information than not enough. So they gave it that directive effectively, and that is what it does. So that was a behavior that it was commanded to have effectively. So the consequence of that is, if it's trying to look for more complicated things to say, it may thus, result in more complicated statements that could thus be misconceived or misconstrued as having thought more than it has, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just interesting stuff going on underneath it. It's not Terminator. It's
Not
a
yet,
chat
right?
bot. It's just better than other chat bots for now. Yeah.
So how would someone, because I work with you, how and why would someone want to use AI in their software, app, game, or whatever?
Yeah.
What is it that the AI can do that will make somebody say, hey, this is something that's going to enhance my internet, software, or whatever presence?
Right. So we should start by saying there's lots of different kinds of AI. Machine learning is simply the process of, subjecting a program to repeated learning over and over, so it builds more efficient ways of doing a thing, or more intelligent ways of doing a thing, in the same way that a child learns. We're kind of simulating that same process, repetition, right? So, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that, different kinds of data you can put in to get different outputs, right? So deep fakes are an example of machine learning, for instance. Deep fakes, let's say you want to take a video of yourself, and you want to produce a video that says things other than you have said, which obviously there's ethical complications that may come with that. And we're starting to hear about the risks of that. But the way you do that is you just give it a lot of video of you talking, and then over time, after enough repetitions, it learns how your facial muscles move, and from that you can train it to simulate you, and then you can give it different dialogue, and it will show the correct imagery to mime those words. Right. So that is a form of machine learning. Another form is text analysis, natural language processing. They call it NLP, which is what we're doing here with ChatGPT, which is where it's been trained using a model of examples of human conversation, and then it takes that model and applies it to conversation that you have with it. So it had input of text, and now it gives output of text. And when you give it more input, it responds in the way that it has been trained. Right. So that is another way that AI can work. There's lots of different, we have, self-driving cars. That's a whole nother thing. That's like image recognition in real time combined with decision-making of like pathfinding and things like that. So there's different forms, right? But there's a lot of different applications for these different kinds of machine learning inputs and outputs. So I guess we could say, let's talk about some very simple day-to-day things that everyone could use that beyond, the 30,000 foot view of everything you could do. Well, as a lot of college kids have learned, it's a great way to write papers for yourself. Which, well, at least until they went premium, which was probably called 90% of the college kids who wanted to write papers. But yeah, now you get paid $20 a month. That's game over there. Better write your own papers. But that does highlight how great this could be to generate documentation that would be monotonous and would just not be a good use of human effort, right? Writing a lot of redundant paperwork. That's a great thing for this thing to do if you train it, and you can train it more specifically towards a particular industry. You could do real estate or legal or anything else, right? Like if it has enough input data, you can get enough output. So that's one thing. This could be a productivity saver where instead of spending your time writing the same documentation, to account for slight differences in permutation. Let's say you're selling two different properties, they have two different sets of attributes, but the general framework of the documentation is the same. It just needs to know, well, how do I handle this versus this? This might be a good solution for that, right? So document automation is a good one there. Support automation. So we're talking chatbots here. Well, the big commercial utility for chatbots is companies providing useful support to users that doesn't require them calling a person in a call center, which is great in a lot of ways. For starters, call centers are generally miserable for the people that work in them. So, if you can find another way to be able to support people who need support without it having to be a call center model, it's probably a good thing. But then the issue is, well, how do you give accurate feedback, right? And that's a challenge they've been trying to solve with useful chatbots, which they are doing now. They're better than ever before. So that's a quality of life benefit for everyone, is if you can actually get your answers to a question from a chatbot without having to take 30 minutes out of your day to call, be set on hold for 10 minutes, and then get passed around, hung up on, call back. That's better for everyone. Yeah, we all relate to that. Like, we've been there for something, right? People don't like chatbots because they generally don't work well. Well, that's changing now. So it might actually be a good thing. Let's see here. What else could they be useful for? Search, for instance, trying to find things that you're looking for, right? Like, we already have some really great search engines, but there are, all kinds of additional applications for this AI to enhance search. Not just necessarily searching the internet, but searching other kinds of things, maybe searching your own life. Possibilities for memory assist. There's a lot of opportunities here that these could help with, right? So yeah, there's a lot of different applications that I can see. The rate at which those things will develop is going to vary on investment. It's going to vary on public interest. Sometimes something can be too new, can be too ahead of its time, and it scares people, so they don't engage in it, or it's too different from what they're used to, and thus they don't know how to engage with it, so they just don't. So that's something that'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, is now that a lot of the hype has come, and people have tried this out. Will the layman find useful ways to integrate this into their life, or will it be reserved for a small group of people who see the potential, who are willing to read the papers and understand the science and make the most of it? I'm not sure yet. It might be a while. It might be like VR, where it came and people were excited, and then it ends up being niche in the end. Or it might
I was
not.
literally about to ask you that. So
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think it will? I'm sure we both agree sooner or later AI is going to be something magnificent, just because you can almost create another human. So we think anyway.
Yeah.
But within the near future, do you think it might kind of just fade back into the background like VR?
Well, so I think AI, in the ways that it's being used, it's meant to be in the background. Which is something we should point out. Like, it's meant to be doing things behind the scenes where you don't have to understand how it works in order to get the benefits of it. That's kind of the point. Right. Whereas VR is a very intentional thing you have to choose to engage with, and it can't be subtly implemented into technologies you're already using, whereas AI can and already has in a lot of ways. Pick your social media platform. They're all using AI of some kind to moderate content. And that's a whole art in and of itself, of or not just moderate, but also emphasize content, to push things to the front. When you have billions and billions of data points, how do you decide which ones should go in front of your eyes versus not? Well, people aren't deciding that in real time, a computer is, right? So it's already happening in that regard. The question is, how directly will people choose to engage with it beyond the ways it's already being subtly implemented? And that's really what we're looking at, right? So I gave the example of document automation. Another good one is image creation. There's a great thing. It's called DALL-E, which I don't know if you've heard of this, but named after, of course, the painter, which is an AI image creation tool. And it's currently making some serious waves in another number of other AI image generation tools, because people have been able to create some really remarkable painterly sort of imagery and even win competitions by feeding the AI the right text and having it do most of the work beyond that of creating imagery. Because what it does is it's been fed millions of images of anything you can imagine. All those images have been classified in what they are. This is a cat, this is a dog, and so on. And then when you type out picture of cat and dog on green hill, it looks for a picture of a green hill and a dog and a cat, and it tries to find an interesting, intelligent way of putting those things together, right? And thus, the stuff you can do with it, the level of complexity it's reached is really rather remarkable. There's a pretty notable case last year where a guy, I want to say it was a state, it was a state-run competition, I believe, but I think it was like for like a state fair or something like that, where you had to create like an image. I don't remember the exact, so don't quote me on it. But basically, there was a major cash prize competition where a guy used AI to generate the image that he then won with. So this, of course, caused a lot of uproar. Like, well, I painted this thing and I lost to a thing that a guy used a computer. What was interesting about that, though, is he documented his process of how he did it, and he tweeted about it later on. He said, I think he spent like 2 weeks coming up with the exact sentence to give it. And I think that and I think that zeroes in on what we're losing, but also what we're gaining here. Because it's not that artists have been rendered obsolete. They're not going to be. It's not even that they've been, replaced in some major way where they have to pivot. I mean, there are concerns that now, the barrier of entry to create interesting art is lower, for sure. And there's a lot of copyright infringement issues here, because a lot of those images that have been submitted to it are coming from copyrighted material. So there's a question legally of like, the thing that it produces, is it violating copyright laws or not? It's very ambiguous, where it's going to take a long time to figure out how this stuff shakes out. But it does speak to how, although, yes, the barrier of entry to create visually interesting art has now been lowered, it has also lowered the barrier of entry for people who did not have visual creative talent, but did have creative talent with words, where they used to be incapable of creating visual art that was interesting, and thus they had to settle for just words, whereas now they don't have to. So just as it has inconvenienced a lot of artists, it's also empowered other people. And I think that's something it's important. This is about attitude and framing, right? There's no shortage of disruptive technologies that have changed the way we live. There's a pretty hilarious ink quill pen written letter by a literary complaining about how the typewriter was going to ruin people's ability to write. He's like, well, he wasn't wrong. No one knows cursive anymore, but we get things done a lot faster, right? Because now we can type. So, if you're very entrenched in a very specific skill and doing it in a specific way, yes, it's a threat, but it's also a huge opportunity. There was an opportunity cost to not having this thing. Now that we have it, that opportunity cost has been eliminated, which is you can create visual things that are interesting faster. What else could you do with that time instead now, right? So things worth considering when you think about these technologies. They are disruptive, and they will take in some ways, but they'll give in others.
Yeah,
and I'm a designer, so I'm kind of threatened by this.
I was waiting for the new technology and see where it's going to take us. So what is your favorite, and or if it's different, best thing that you work on? So you do gaming, you do software, you do apps, because you can like doing gaming, but you might be better at software.
Yeah.
What do the two overlap? Are the two the same?
What specific discipline within that is like my favorite? Because it's a lot of things, right? Yeah. I would say the thing that I gravitate towards the most is definitely the design side of it. I've always loved art. I've always loved creating, visual things that are interesting. I sketch in my free time. I'm producing a graphic novel in my free time for the fun of it. And so I always come back to that, that's definitely the part of it I love the most. When I was in games, my focus was UX design, was usability design. For those who don't know, that is the practice of creating experiences for users. Usually in the software realm, but UX is technically really any product that people interact with has a UX component to it. When you design a car on the inside, well, where do all the controls go? How do you make the air conditioner knobs look like that? That's a UX decision. It's deciding, well, what is the user experience of this device going to be? Who is our user? What do they want? What do they not want? How do we design around that? That's basically what it is. So I love the human aspect of design, and I love not just making things because they look good, but making things that work as well and also look good. If you can do all of that at once, you've made it, right? So I like that extra challenge there for sure. Yeah, I would say that's probably on a technical level, as far as the things that I do in a given day. That's probably part of what I love the most, because I love people. I love working with people and understanding them. And I love designing things that people will appreciate.
I will say you have a extremely good ability to take things that we say and understand what we're actually trying to say. Because we've had many conversations, and there's a lot that goes on up here, and maybe because I'm tired or I can't think of the words or whatever the case may be, I can't fully articulate exactly the picture or whatever I'm trying to convey to you. And at the end of the conversation, you're like, yep, you want this, you're looking for this. And that, I think that's an important gift. I wanted to make sure that was put out there, because it's only you and one other person I know who can do that. And I don't see that a lot in society, period, where people can kind of regurgitate the heart and the mind of another person. It's kind of like you're reading their soul and their mind from the few words that they're giving you.
I appreciate that. Very well articulated. By the way, you might be one of those people, because that's what I wanted to hear. I can't take all the credit. My mom was a professional communicator, so I have those genes.
It makes sense now. Okay.
Yeah. And also, my father's an Italian immigrant. He grew up in Italy, so he learned Italian originally, and then his family moved to Germany when he was very young. So he had to learn German, elementary school age. And then he came to the US when he was a teenager. So he learned 3 languages by the time he entered high school, which is a huge advantage in some ways, but it can also really be very complicating, right? Because whenever you're deciding how to speak, you're choosing your words from 3 different languages every time. And I think I greatly admire how articulate he is, considering he has that level of challenge there, because he has all those words swimming in his head. But it does also there's a limitation to that, as anyone would, which is it can make it hard to convey a certain level of nuance in conversation. So I think I grew up having to intuit that from him, So yeah, I'm thankful I had that experience, though, for sure, because I am a professional communicator too. I talk and I listen for a living, so I better know how to do it if I'm going to do what I do. So, yeah. Thank you.
You get the snaps. My grandmother's she's gone now, but my grandmother's Japanese, and every culture and every language you get how do you say?
Yep. That is a human universal, my friend.
So you have a team X Factor. What is your hat on the team? What do you do, and what are the roles of your other colleagues and / employees?
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, we all come from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different cool work. And it's changed over the years too, because we've expanded quite a bit lately, especially with all the layoffs in tech. We've actually brought a lot of additional people into the fold, which has been. It's unfortunate that's what started a lot of it for them, but it's also we're really fortunate to have a lot of sales in a time when a lot of other companies in our space are really struggling to have the sales to support the people that work with them. So I'm thankful we're in that spot. I'm really happy we can bring people in to hopefully make up for that in some way for them. But I myself, so as any entrepreneur does, I've worn a lot of hats over the years, but I'm trying to take a few of those hats off now as we expand, so I can delegate more. So, project management is still very much a critical role that I play in. And of course, developing the business, I'm the owner. So there's some things that only I can do, and I do those things first and foremost. And I've led design up until this point. I'm actually going to start delegating that as well. I want to stay involved in the design process so that I'm cognizant, because if you don't keep getting your hands dirty to some degree, eventually you lose it, and there are consequences to that. I don't want the quality of what we do to suffer because I'm too detached, right? So that's something I'm trying to stay cognizant of. I love organizational theory and management theory, so it's something I've studied quite a bit, and that's something that I've seen in a lot of the case studies that I've reviewed, is that as management gets too disconnected from doing the work, they can begin to lose sight of what the people that are doing the work do, right? And that's a recipe for disaster. So I want to try to be mindful of that. So doing less design work, but I still want to be involved in that. And it's also part of why I like to do design work in my free time, is it keeps me cognizant of what it means to be a designer. And I'm thankful that I have a lot of heavy engineering background as well, because I work with a ton of software engineers in different disciplines. So being able to speak their language is really valuable. I am ultimately an expert generalist, though. That is what I do. I'm 80% of the way in a lot of different things, which means that I can work with lots of different people who are subject matter experts on their things to close the gaps. I have a few expertise of my own, but I am ultimately, at this point in my life, I'm a generalist, right? And that works well considering the broad span of different kinds of projects for different clients that we do. These days, I'm a people person more than anything else. That's, I guess, my primary role. But as far as the rest of the guys that work with us, they're all over the place. I mean, we have front-end developers, we have back-end payment processing experts, we have IT and systems administration experts, we have e-learning authors. I've been an e-learning author myself. I've created 17 different e-learning courses over the years, and now I'm starting to add more people on the team. So we're going to have a bunch of them going at once too, which is exciting. Pretty good variety there.
So you are basically the software version of Elon Musk.
That is quite the compliment, so I will take it. If I get to have rockets someday, then yeah, fingers crossed.
I've seen a lot of interviews. Have you heard that Elon is able to talk to the engineers about thermodynamics? Then he goes to another room and he's talking about astronomy or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, which I know as well, because I talk to you all the time. But that's amazing.
Yeah, you bet. And yeah, I greatly respect that is his approach to that. I think that's imperative, that you stay close to the bare metal. You remember what it was like to be there. Like when I was a younger man, 29, but when I was really, first cutting my teeth, I had coding sessions till 3 a.m. I remember that, like I don't want to forget what that was like, because
So what reasons should people call you? They want to develop a game, they have an idea for an app, they're trying to create some type of software because they have a vision for something. What reasons would you say best fit what you and your company does?
From a company perspective, we don't do game development, although we have worked with game development companies before, to help them on strategy. So if someone wanted to develop a game, like I can talk to them about strategy, and I'm very well networked in the industry where I can point them to the right people for sure. We don't make them ourselves anymore. That's sort of a previous life for me. But I can talk to them about it, and I give them strategy, and I can talk about pitfalls to avoid and give the right warnings, and also, ideally the right advice too. For the primary lines of business that we're in, I guess I can reiterate our primary services and talk about what that might look like. We do a lot of strategy development for businesses. I mean, we've worked with, small businesses, corporate clients that are publicly traded. We've worked with large nonprofits. You name it. We work with a Pluralsight, the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. I was a big myself for 3 years, so I was really happy when I got to start working with them on stuff. So we're pretty industry agnostic. The industry isn't really the deciding factors for what determines if we're going to work with someone or not. We're very cognizant of our bandwidth. I do not take on more projects than we can handle. And I want to make sure we have the right personnel in place before we expand that bandwidth to more projects, because I'd rather do a few very well than a lot mediocre. You want a mediocre software dev team, there are 1,000 of them on Google. Go find that. I value our portfolio, and we only have a strong portfolio if we can do the job well. So what that means is we're pretty particular about which clients we do take on. And depending if they want app dev, that's definitely a good thing they can talk to us about. I can talk a little about our process there too. We do a lot of discovery sessions for pretty complex projects first, which, depending on the scope of it, those are generally, we usually charge for that, but we give very thorough reviews and reports of what the industry looks like for their current, whatever their app they want to build. What's their competition like? What do they do well, not well? How novel is their concept? What do we project the actual development of the project is going to entail, like very granular, specific technology stacks. And what kind of personnel we need, the timetable we project. Try and project their overhead as well. Obviously, things can change. If they're relying on a service that changes its price point mid-development, I can't control that, but I can at least tell you, hey, if you're going to have X thousand users, it'll probably cost you this amount. Like, we have a data analyst who works with us on that. For instance, if you want to do a chat GPT, an OpenAI based project, well, that's a paid for service. They have a token service. And depending on the complexity of the model that you want to use, because it has different levels of intelligence, they charge different rates for that. And it's token based. So every word that it processes is a token, and that charges it's a fraction of a cent. But that can really add up when you have one user typing 10,000 words in one session, and that's one of 1,000 users in an hour scaled over a year. Like, those are numbers that impact your overhead. You got to know. So we try and go in that level of detail as early as possible to get real numbers, so investors can have a real idea of, well, what are you actually going to be spending 2 years from now on this thing, right? So we like people who understand the value of knowing that kind of information in advance, are willing to invest in getting it done right. And giving us the bandwidth to go out and figure that out for them before they, invest or tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in a project to really know, okay, this is going to be what we want it to be. So as far as our customer looks like, we really like people who are cognizant of that, who are cautiously optimistic, appreciate technology, and really understand their own space, and can give us useful information and can work on a timetable and really communicate with us effectively. As long as they can do that, I'm happy to work with pretty much anyone. And that extends to the app dev. We do like corporate websites, larger scale web projects, and strategy development, and then e-learning as well. We work really just with Pluralsight. We've looked at other e-learning platforms to develop courses, but all of their clients are corporate clients. They're Microsoft, they're Amazon, whatever. They sign up for a membership. They want to teach their employees how to use C# in the .NET framework or something like that. A lot of programming or design courses. So they will hire a Pluralsight to commission courses from us to do those sorts of things. But sometimes companies want their own personalized training just for their internal use about a specific kind of software that they use or a specific concept they need to go over. So we're well equipped to do that as well. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Excellent.
I saw a question pop up.
Oh.
Angel, do you want to ask him this?
I see that.
Let me unmute you. Go ahead, Angel.
Sure thing. So we had an app go bust.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was put together, it was fine, but it already needed 2.0. So it still needs a lot of help.
Mm-hmm.
We've got like we've got all the basics of it and it can work, but can y'all pick up where another company dropped the ball?
Yes. So with a caveat. So we've done projects like that in the past. We are open to them. We like to know as much about the technology stack it's built off of first. We like to know what it's doing well and not well. And we really like to, ideally, if we can look at the code base and see the state that it's in, because depending on, I don't know if it was an outsourced project, was it done domestically? You don't have to answer this stuff now. I'm just going to give you parameters about it.
Yes and no. The coder was not. He was from Nigeria, maybe.
Okay. There are exceptions, but general rule of thumb that with a lot of outsourcing projects is that there's a reason they're cheaper. There are plenty of outsourcing shops that are very good at what they do, but for the most part, a lot of times they're using outdated versions of software that they might work well enough for a little while, but they end up being ticking time bombs where they're built off of you know, I don't know, let's say they're using PHP for their database and it's like 7 years out of date. The moment you update it, there's a whole bunch of dependency files that break as a result of that. So it's going to be very difficult to tell from the outside with a quick glance what the long-term scope of work is going to be in a project like that, because you really have to evaluate, you know, what it's all built in. So the only way I can really tell you is if we looked at it, but that's also the only way anyone could really know. We're open to it, but we need a lot of detail first. That way we can give you good direction and strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in the App Store.
Oh, it is great. Oh, well, I mean the back end, the code base. Like we'd have to see it. Yeah, yeah. So, no, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Awesome, for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
Last question, Tony.
What's up?
So how would someone try to provide a way for or a roadmap for, I always feel like it's a kid going to watch and they're like, I want to do that.
Mhm.
What would you say to that little kid? How do they be you?
How do they be me? Oh man. Well, me is changing, as are a lot of software engineers and designers and everything else. AI is a big part of that for sure. The rate of acceleration that these things are changing, it used to be you could tell someone, go to a university, get a computer science degree, learn C++ and C#, and you'll get a job. It's not that simple anymore. And that is because even the process of software development is being automated. My guys use AI to write code faster. Can't beat them, join them, you know? What that means is, frankly, as it gets better, you're going to need fewer software engineers. So the best of the best, and especially the ones that understand AI, are going to stick around, and the rest might not cut it. That's just the practical reality of what might happen. Kind of think about, you know, auto manufacturing and automation, robots assembling cars. You don't need nearly as many people on the assembly line as you used to, right? Same reason. Software engineering is not immune to that. So I would say the single best piece of advice that I could give regarding what, if you're a kid right now who wants to understand how to work in software development, is understand AI, because it is going to automate parts of what we're doing, and it's going to continue doing that. And if you can be the kind of engineer who understands that, then you can be on the winning end of the curve instead of trying to play catch up, right? But beyond that, if you have an entrepreneurial flair to you, identify that and accept that and try and work on it early on. Like don't talk yourself out of it. You know, when you're younger, you can take a greater risk. So you might as well do it when you can, right? Before you have a family to support or anything else. Like I grew up being comfortable around entrepreneurs, so it felt familiar, but it still came with a great deal of risk. I mean, it didn't just fall into my lap, right? I had to get comfortable early on with being on my own and having to figure things out on my own. And that's an idea that you have to accept pretty readily, is that like institutions can provide answers, but they won't always be the best answers. They won't always be the right ones. Sometimes you just got to figure it out, and you're going to make mistakes. You're not necessarily going to have it all the right way in the beginning, but I mean, what entrepreneur does, you know?
Right.
My favorite quote, I think, of all time is actually a Dr. Seuss quote. It's, "You've got to be odd to be number one," which firstly is an amazing pun, and I love that. But secondly, I think there's a pretty deep truth to that, which is it is inherently strange to do anything important. It's weird, it just is, right? And I think there's an inherent kind of weirdness, and maybe even a sense of shame a lot of entrepreneurs carry with themselves. They're worried that, like, well, you know, we're not doing things the standard way that everyone else does, right? They're not the 9 to 5. They don't have the security. And that sounds great until you get laid off, right? Or until your position is liquidated or something else. So I think to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be okay with being strange, with being an outlier, with saying, you know what, I'm doing things differently. I'm going to learn from other people, but this is weird, and that's fine. Because eventually you get to be number one. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Thanks.
I'm gonna add that to my repertoire. Gotta be odd to be number one. I appreciate it, Tony.
Absolutely, man.
I know we're gonna talk probably 30 more times before the end.
More or less. Just text the group chat.
Yeah, but, I really do appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you giving a different perspective of being an entrepreneur, being innovative, and using your passion and your talents to do something to further, man. So thank you for coming on. This video and the audio will be disseminated into a billion different pieces on a million different platforms. And thank you, Angel, for joining. You're always so helpful. We have a few different people that love to come in and check on a live as we're growing our broadcast. But Angel has always been a good supporter of mine, so I appreciate you. So everyone else, I will see you guys next Tuesday. Tony, I'll probably see you next Tuesday or something too. And I'll see you guys later.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Have a great rest of your night.
All right. See you later. Bye.